Hi everyone, welcome to the iNACOL webinar, Approaches to Evaluating Supplemental Online Learning Programs. This is Rob Darrow from iNACOL. We're glad you could join us today. A couple quick announcements before we officially get started. First, just know that from time to time, because we're on the commercial internet, you may hear a delay in sound, or what some people affectionately call chipmunking or Minnie Mouse, where somebody's voice sounds really like a chipmunk. That's just natural, it just happens. Know that we are recording this webinar and you're welcome to share it with other people. I will send an email out as soon as the recording is finished, either later today or tomorrow, as soon as that is rendered. And then finally, just to let you know that we have another webinar dealing with data later this month, next week actually, and you're welcome to join us for that as well. I'm putting that link in the chat room, using data to improve the management and operations of an online school. So we got our two evaluation kind of related webinars during the month of December so that you can all listen to them, and then of course take your holidays to digest that and then put that into great use after the holidays. So with that, I'd like to give you a little bit of information about this webinar. The focus for today is really the evaluation of supplemental online programs. And as we all know, the information that's being shared today can be applied to full-time programs as well as blended learning programs. The other thing, as we all know, is it takes time to learn what to evaluate and how to evaluate, and then how to report the results. And so part of our purpose today is having two well-established programs share that information back with us. The Michigan Virtual School, that's been around, almost 15 years now, and the Florida Virtual School, almost 20 years. Have taken the time over time to figure these questions out. So I'm happy to introduce both of them to you today and happy that they're both here. So we're going to start with the Michigan Virtual School, and I'm turning it over to Joe Friedoff. So Joe, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rob. So my name is Joe Friedoff. I am the director of the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, which is one of the three divisions for the Michigan Virtual University. Another one of those divisions is the Michigan Virtual School. And so I'm going to be trying to talk a little bit about some of the ways we go about looking at data and trying to use it for student performance. And it's a very timely event because every year the state of Michigan's legislature asks us to produce a report to the legislature, and that's always due on December 1st. So these things are fresh in my mind, and the report is out, and I'll share a link with that later. So just a couple of quick things. As Rob said, we've been in existence since 2000. We were created by the Michigan legislature. The company, the parent company of the Michigan Virtual School, is a 501c3 organization. That's the Michigan Virtual University. So it's a little bit different. We technically are outside of the school system and don't act as a school per se. We are a supplementary program. Students cannot graduate from the Michigan Virtual School. In fact, we don't even give grades. What we do is we report back to the schools the total number of points in the course and the points that the kid earned, and then the schools have it as their responsibility to determine how they transcript that locally. Primarily, we serve high school students. We do have a little bit of middle school students. Last year, I think we were just around 20,000 enrollments for the year, and since our inception, we're over 138,000. We offer courses in math and science, and social studies, world language, other categories. We have about 200 to 250 different online courses at any time that we offer. The key topics that I wanted to talk to you today about, and I think we've got a good mix after seeing Florida's slides earlier, that I'm going to handle it more from kind of the data end and how we do it, and they're going to get more, I think, into the inside the classroom. So I want to talk about 5 topics. The 5 topics are seen here, and I'll walk through each one as we go. So the first one is accreditation. I think this is an extremely helpful process. And the Michigan Virtual School is accredited through Advance Ed. I'm not here to advocate one organization or another. I think some of them are regional and some of them are people's what works for them. But what I like about the accreditation process is it's very holistic in its thinking. So I know when we went through the process a few years ago, you do a major site visit every 5 years with Advance Ed, and they have 3 or more people who will come out They'll look at the products that you put together. They will interview your teams. You'll give presentations. And they ask you a wide-ranging set of data to collect. For instance, what's the purpose and the direction of this school or this program? What's the governance structure or the leadership structure? What are you doing in teaching and learning and an assessment for learning? And then what are the resources and support systems? And finally, how do you then take all of those results and kind of feed it back in an iterative design? And in the advanced ed spirit, we're required each year then to report back how we're doing on these measures, setting goals, tracking that information, and turning it around in a way that is supposed to be about school improvement. And so I think that's a good stamp and a good place to start for any program that's kind of looking at a holistic approach. Well, if we get down more at kind of the course level, one of the areas that this webinar was asked was about perceptual data. And I will say, to be quite frank, I find this to be one of the more challenging data collections that the Michigan Virtual School experiences. And part of it is philosophical about this. So MVU, the Michigan Virtual School, has a policy that is no extra credit. So that we don't give any kind of incentive to the students to complete an end-of-course survey, and that is done intentionally. There are other schools or districts I know that will find ways to try to increase response rate, whether that is tying it to points, tying it to not releasing the students' data to the school until a survey is completed. We haven't taken any of those steps. So our perceptual data in this case, the student feedback is probably about less than 10% on average per course. I've included a link at the bottom. If you want to see how we go about it, you can see exactly the questions there. They range from elements that are about course design, to elements that are about the instructor specifically, to elements that are about online learning in general and their readiness, their perceptions of the online course versus what they take face-to-face, rigor in some of those issues, and also collecting some data about their experience. So there's a lot of different factors, and you can, to some extent, some of the different question sets we give to different departments inside the organization. The student perceptual data here is given to the teachers as part of their annual review. So that is incorporated into how we assess our teachers and decide whether they will be extended a contract for the following year. And in the video, this is just a screenshot of it, but one of the things that we tried to do was make a personal appeal. So instead of just having click the link to go to the survey, we actually had the president of the organization, and just like a 30-second video, having some FaceTime and asking, would you be willing to take this? It helps us to improve the product. As I said, it's been a challenge for us. The other challenge in the perceptual data for a supplementary provider, and maybe others of you have faced this, is that trying to get access to accurate parent emails is very difficult because the school districts themselves often don't have it, or the person who is enrolling the student does not have it at hand. And so in any case for us, it's pretty rare that we would have anywhere near complete data to send out to parents to try to gauge their input. So that becomes another challenge that you don't see as much in something like a full-time online program. So reporting results. I want to spend the next handful of slides to talk about what we do on an annual basis. It's required by the state of Michigan's legislature. It's required in part because we receive appropriations through them, so it's an accountability measure. You can see the link at the bottom. You can download this report in its PDF form by using that link. I'm only going to touch on a handful of the items in there that I think are particularly relevant for assessing supplemental schools. So one of the things we'll do at the front, and this has some kind of, I guess, visual appeal to many of our customers, is we plot them on the map. So this is the map of Michigan. We use SQL report server and spatial data sets to be able to tie where they're coming from to a specific GIS location, and we plot them. We can do this not only at kind of a the same size dot pattern, so you can see, just where did they come from. And we also have the ability to make the dots bigger or smaller based on the number of students. So you can think of it as a density map that helps us to look at some of those regions. In case you're not familiar with Michigan, that bottom right area, that's Detroit. Kind of the big cluster a little bit more over to the far left is Grand Rapids, and in the middle of the state there's that's Lansing. And if you look in the UP, there just really isn't that many people that live in the middle. That's where I'm from. But so the map kind of helps us get an idea of where people are coming from. You can do this as well by a particular content area or a course type, and that's been really helpful for us to kind of see where the results are coming from. The next thing we do is we report by content area course completion rate. And I think this is a good area to talk first about. Not all completion rates are the same. And so when you're looking at data sets or you're looking at reporting results from various schools, take some time to understand what that means. And for yourself as a school, I want you to think about how your policies impact these kinds of completion rates. So while you see this image right here, what you're not seeing is the paragraph that precedes it in the report that actually outlines and defines, here's how Michigan Virtual School counts its completion rate. And for Michigan Virtual School, what we do is we take the number of kids who earn 60% or more of the total course points, and we divide it by the number of students who got 10% or more of the total course points. So if that makes sense, you recognize that one of the things we just did was students who earn 0 to 9.99 are not included in the completion rate. One, I think that's important to point out, so we do in the legislative report. And second is to understand why and its impact. So one of the reasons we don't report on those is because we consider them to be non-attempted enrollments. But it's tied into policy. So we go back and forth at this stage from a policy perspective to say, well, maybe what we should do is report them. Well, if we report them, then we would do something different. For instance, we would institute a policy that if students are not progressing or students haven't logged in or something like that, then the Michigan Virtual School will institute an automatic drop policy, which other schools will do. And so it comes back at this kind of trade-off. And so what we've decided is if a district wants to drop a student, that needs to be a district decision. We need to do our best job of using data points to try to alert them in the cases where, for instance, an entire course or the first 2 weeks or the first month, the kid has never even logged into the course, and so on. But that intersection of policy and the results, I think, are really important for you to understand when you look at that, and just make ones that seem to make the most sense for your own district. So we'll calculate these out each year, again, according to those that performance formula, and then we compare them longitudinally. So we'll look for them over several years. In this case, it's a 3-year span that tracks this to see are we relatively stable above a certain percentage. So in our metrics that the Michigan Virtual School will go to the board sets the threshold at about 80%. Are we at least exceeding 80%? And then ultimately, do we see some kind of growth progression? And this is always an interesting perspective as we're trying to think about, well, what's optimal? Of course, if the course is very simple, you should have higher results. If you start to bring in, as we revise courses or we bring in new courses that we think have greater rigor, better assessments, and so on, you could see some drops. So it's not per se that we always need to see the rise, although that seems to suggest some good things, but trying to meet a threshold and understand, for instance, why did world languages in 2011-12 all of a sudden drop in 2012-2013 by X number? And then seeing it in this way helps us go back and say, okay, well, I actually know why that happened. That happened because of X school and Y product. There was a large number of students in a particular school. They were middle school students who were using a high school product, for instance. And so you can look at this and start to ask important questions that help you get towards those effectiveness measures. Another graph that we do is we do this histogram so we can see the curves. And as a researcher, I think it's an interesting graph to begin with. But when we first started doing this graph, one of the things that we noticed was, the way that we pay our teachers seems to be represented in the results of the graph. And that was, at that time, what we were doing is most of our teachers at the Michigan Virtual School are on a contract basis. So they get paid X amount for the enrollment, they get X amount or Y amount if the student gets above a certain score. And so we would see pretty strong asymptotes at that time at around the 60% threshold, which what we believe for most is a pass, and that's why the threshold was set there. But the data results looked a little bit like, it almost seems like there's too many kids getting over that 60. Are we running into a situation where we're artificially inflating the 60 when that's not what we want to do? And so we looked at the policy of how we were paying instructors, changed that incentive structure, and in fact, it actually changed a bit the way that this curve looked into a way that we thought was a little bit more in line with what we were expecting. I'm just trying to read Bob. How are you? So in the Michigan Virtual, this is in regard to Bob, how are you defining attrition for your program? The way that it works is that you can typically drop the course within, usually it's the first month or the first handful of weeks. They can request a drop. After that, they could choose to withdraw. The data points that are in here are run for any student who is approved enrolled after at the end of the semester. And then finally what we do, and this is reported out for every single course in our catalog, we give the course title, we give the total number of students who are enrolled, and we give the completion rate for them. So we will take this report, we make copies of it, we send them over to the superintendents and principals throughout the state, so they have access to this as well as being posted online. So if they want to know how did kids with the Michigan Virtual School do in Algebra 1 last year, they have the data to be able to look at it. So that's how we do some of the things with reporting externally. Internally, we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated and have been using SQL reports to create canned PDFs that are refreshed every morning, or basically 2 o'clock in the morning, for our staff to be able to look at key data points. And so I'm just going to run you through a couple of these. One of it is that we're looking at why do kids drop the MVS courses. And this gets back to this attrition information. These are kids who are enrolled in the class. At some point prior to the drop deadline, they say they do not want to continue. So we look, when they drop, they pick one of these reasons, and then we break it down. And so not all drops are the same for us. There's certain things we can't impact. Changing a student's schedule or life situation is going to be really hard for the school to be able to impact. And so, in fact, we want to see that number high, and it is. It's about 47% of the non-home schools, and that seems about right. But there are others you don't want to be high. Concerns about course quality or concerns about instructor quality, things that that impact you and that you have an impact on. You want to see those percentages small, and in many of these cases you see that to be, you see that. Then what we do later in this report is we break out some of these subcategories. So we'll say, well, if you picked that you were concerned about the course quality, let's find out what courses went into that, and let's find out if there's a high leverage point. And by that I mean, is the number of enrollments a lot, and it's a percentage of the drop over a critical threshold. So for instance, the 50% drops in accounting B, 50% of drops is not good, but if there's only one kid in the course, you have 1 out of 2 now, it's not really something that is statistically important. Likewise, look at American Sign Language, there were 18 drops, which is quite a big number, but out of 401, it's not something that would spend a lot of time on. And so we look at these to be able to try to gauge patterns, to go back to our product development team to look at this, to identify, is there something we ought to be looking at in more depth in this course? We look at technology issues as another one, and we're trying to find out, is there something that we could do to help our courses be more accessible? We look at schools, for instance. So is there a cluster of drops that comes from a particular school? Because it could mean a couple of things. It could mean that there's a great opportunity for training for this school to help them understand how to better use the system, or it may mean that there's some error in how we're sharing that content, that they're getting into the wrong course to begin with, and then they're transferring out of it, maybe to another course or maybe not at all. And so we use these to identify schools that we could follow up with either through the phone or with site visits, see if we can help them find a more efficient way of helping the students get enrolled in the course. And then finally, in terms of the internal monitoring, we use multiple providers of courses. We track those over time. So we want to know that if you take an English class with the Michigan Virtual School, it doesn't matter whether your product is with the vendor A, B, or C. You're getting a consistently high level of performance or quality out of those courses. So we'll track that across vendor and across content areas to make sure. And then every so often, we put out a new RFP, a request for proposal for content, to make sure that we're trying to get the best content that exists out there. And finally, I want to end with this idea about the external assistance. There's a lot of things that a program can do inside, but it's often helpful to share outside. And I believe both Florida Virtual and the Michigan Virtual School participated in this project that was done by the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, that actually had them take some time. They looked at our courses. We gave them demo access. We helped answer a bunch of questions. But what they were looking at is how well these courses prepare kids and in particular, have accessibility obstacles or things that they could be learned from them. And so opening up your program to allow other researchers to come in, to poke around, to ask questions, especially in cases when they do it across other vendors, there's a lot of interesting questions you get to answer, like why do we do it that way? Or we have to explain our data collection process, and through that you start to, I think, hone in on what's important to you. So I think that is another way that you can look at monitoring and creating effective measures in practice. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleagues at Florida Virtual.
And yes, we did participate in that with you all. You're absolutely correct. Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to be here to talk to you about approaches to evaluating supplemental online learning programs. I wanted to get started with just a little bit of information about Florida Virtual School. We do have a part-time, a full-time program, and a global school. Amy and I represent the part-time program. We work in the part-time side of the house, and most of the information we're going to share with you does cross all three of these, but we're very, very focused on what goes on in the part-time world. These were our highlights for this year with 212,000 students served. We actually completed 462,371 enrollments this year. And as we have completed our 15th year, which was last year, we had served over 800,000 total students. So glad that you brought up accreditation, Joe, because we wanted to speak to that a little bit too. We are fully accredited. Our district is accredited by Advanced Ed, just as Joe was speaking about the virtual school. And then we have a few other accreditations that are broken down to different parts of our schools. The Northwest Accreditation Commission is just for our global school. The Southern Association of College and School Councils actually accredits our individual schoolhouses. We do have NCAA approval of all of our core courses, and we are recognized by the NCAA Eligibility Center as an industry leader in online education. At Florida Virtual School, our student-centered goals correlate with our solid outcomes, and we're going to take that view a little less numbers for you, but just like Joe described, going to get a little into the nitty-gritty of the practice. We will share some of our outcomes with you closer to the end, but our goal is to never lose sight of our student and constantly assess and measure progress to ensure those successful outcomes. So we wanted to do just a quick poll to see how everyone was feeling about the effectiveness of their virtual program. So if you're not familiar with the polling tool, if you, we're going to change it to the A, B, yeah. If you look at where the letter A is, and if you just want to choose real quick how you feel your effectiveness is, we just wanted to get a gauge of the room before we started talking. And we will show you those results in just a moment. Okay, well, I'm happy to say that that is right where Amy and I kind of thought everyone would be, so that's very good to know and helpful as we're continuing to talk. And Amy and I are real informal, so please, if you have questions as we're going, don't hesitate to type them in the chat box, and whoever's not talking will help get those answered. I am going to introduce Amy, who's one of our instructional leaders in the part-time program, and let her take it from here for a minute.
Hey everybody, thanks for having us here. We're excited to see who we have in the group and kind of see where we're all at with that depth of knowledge test. So I really enjoyed Joe's take on this and seeing kind of what he's doing with how they're reporting on the completions. We're just going to take it a step further and drill down into what's happening within the courses and kind of just touch on some of the student engagement pieces. So you'll see here we do have a multitude of tools to assess our students, and we're consistently adapting instruction by just accessing the data on student mastery. And some of these things would be areas that you're familiar with, and then of course we've got things that are very central to Florida Virtual School, which are live lessons and discussion-based assessments. So kind of just starting with the student, upon registration, the student has the option of taking a couple learning style quizzes to kind of give us an idea of what kind of learner they are, whether they're visual or auditory or kinesthetic. And it's not a mandatory quiz, but we do find that a majority of the students take this opportunity, and it's a really great way upon entry for our teachers to just kind of know how to target each student. So in addition to that, the next bullet, we've got not all of our courses, but most of our courses have pre and post tests. And it's just to measure where the student's coming from, how far they've come by the end of the course, and we've really seen the value in that because teachers can dive in with a student where they are upon entry. And then by the end, give us a great idea from the post test of what they've mastered. And then throughout the course, we've got the standard module exams to assess the kids, but the two areas that I would say we take great pride in are the opportunities for live instruction. And that can be both in the discussion-based assessments, where this is a stopping point about 4 times per semester that the teacher gets on the phone with the student individually and just kind of through building relationships, but also a conversation about the content, we can assess what's going on for the student, if there's any academic integrity, kind of pull back the student if they need to go to some specific live lessons that will assess a better performance that they are not mastered yet. So it's a really great time. But I have to say that the relationship building part of this piece is really great. So in addition to the DBAs, we have DBAs using our Florida Virtual School Talk. That's DBAs are discussion-based assessments. But we also use this platform, Blackboard Collaborate, to host our live lessons for our students throughout all of the courses that they take with Florida Virtual School. This is an awesome time for the kids to interact with other students and collaborate with kids that are in the same place as they are about in the course. And I would just say this time is really invaluable, and it's an opportunity for the teacher to motivate and interact with kids similar to the brick and mortar, but in a virtual atmosphere and setting. So I'd like to just take a second to show you a snippet of that so that you're able to see what that looks like for us. So bear with me here while I share one of our great middle school teachers doing a live lesson.
Can't hear it.
Well, there you go. Sometimes you run into technology issues and you just have to roll with it and adapt, right? So it looks like we had some problems. So I'm just going to put the link there for you to check out later. It's a YouTube link, and you can check out a little small snippet of some of the manipulatives and the interactive ways that we can reach our students in a live setting similar to this. But really all of these things together, it comes to a result of competency-based learning, and that's what we're all about, is trying to figure out where the student is and not spend tons and tons of time on things they've already mastered. And I think through this process of formative assessment, we're able to do that. So next, we have this in addition to kind of what the student is doing, we really care a whole lot about the experience for the student. And so while the direct instruction and the live lessons, and those are really great ways to evaluate our teachers as well, we want to get a good gauge of how our students are enjoying the actual educational experience. And so we have opportunity for parents and students to undergo surveys about course material, about the experience at different intervals. And then we take some of those pieces of data and then we reflect that on the final evaluations for the teacher. We have access to those reports, myself as a principal, so that I can regularly see what is going on a qualitative side for the teachers and what kind of experience the student is explaining through the surveys with comments, and they're really able to express what their learning experience was like for them, and I'm able to track that. And when I see there's areas or gaps, I'm able to then step in with the teacher and coach and send to professional development. Another area that we have are data reports. Now, these are basically they're things that we have sent to us. They're monthly reports, weekly reports, some daily reports that are generated through our learning management system. And our students, their progress is monitored and then delivered in report styles to our principals and to our directors and other leadership, just to give us some specific information on the teacher and the student. I personally live in about 5 reports a week, and they're just a really great window into what is happening for each of the teachers within their shell and within their students that they're carrying at that time. The report I spend a lot of time in is our no work report. This is the student engagement piece that we rely heavily on. The report tells me what teachers have students idle, what teachers have classes that are full of working kids, and it's a really great time for me to share this data as a whole with my schoolhouse, with my specific teachers that I supervise, and then we can create target goals to accomplish from week to week to re-engage our students. We have lots of conversations, though, I have to say, about individual students, because while pace is important, it's all about what the students' needs are. They're coming to us as professional athletes or students with medical concerns, so we do have personal situations that we adjust pace for. And then lastly, you'll see up here are the course health reports. And these reports really take into account the larger objectives that we have about curriculum and ease of use. One of the components that we rely heavily on is the average weeks to complete, because this can give us a lot of insight as to what the hurdles are for the kids and how long it should take to get through a course on average. And this also gives us guidance in our curriculum department to set up different specific choke lesson, live lesson types of things for curriculum to adjust if our course health reports are showing a need. We really wanted to show a couple examples of some of our mind share, which is back here on our first slide when we're talking about where the students are surveyed. Just to give you an idea of what questions are asked, I know that this is a really great place for the qualitative side of the data, and we get a lot of questions surrounding what the typical actual questions in the mind share look like, and so I think Robin's got a little piece to share with you here.
Delay, guys. I was trying to grab you a screenshot of our Mindshare questions. What you're looking at, Laurel, thanks for asking, and sorry that we didn't put this on the slide to start with, is a summary of our overall of all of the schoolhouses. I didn't pull any single schoolhouses because they have names on them and teachers, but this is an overall picture of the sum total of the schoolhouses. It's a snapshot in time. This is a monthly report that we look at. The questions that we ask are things like the level of care that your teachers showed. Were they there for you when you needed them? What was the quality of communication? We can break this down by schoolhouse, by instructional leader and all the way down to teacher. So these are the mind share questions that we use. Now this, I think Joe was describing earlier that it's not, oh, you're more than welcome. It's not a required survey. We're the same way. They can get around it. We do ask, we do remind, but we don't require the survey, much like Michigan Virtual. Now I'll have to go back and figure out my slides. All right, thanks. So accountability and fidelity are crucial to our outcomes. Our quality assurance team is devoted to holding all of our instructors and their practices to the highest standards. We originally formed this team to be dedicated to monitoring and reporting out to all stakeholders, and they are one of our more important resources in ensuring quality and accountability. On the screen here are a few examples of the types of data reporting that they generate, and they enable the instructional leadership team to evaluate instructor performance. The variety of the reports enables all instructors to have fidelity checks looking into how they assess their students, how they communicate with stakeholders, and how they monitor student progress. The one example is the instructional audit. This is a comprehensive audit focusing on our teachers' active students. It includes a QA of customer service calls. They have a script. They call parents and ask about the quality of communication. They pull data from our student management system. They look at teacher feedback samples and review the tone and timeliness in email. Our fidelity checks they do on the part-time side and on the full-time side, which is a comprehensive audit which emulates the Florida Department of Education's audit. So it focuses on completed students. We go back and make sure everything was done right after they're completed, but to make sure everything was done right. It includes samples from feedback again, documentation samples, review of all fidelity items, including final exams, discussion-based assessments, and if any voice activities were required, just to make sure that all the requirements were met before the student was actually completed. And we do this periodically, annually per instructor. Concern and celebration reports, I think that makes sense. They are, we do try to catch people doing good stuff too, just like I'm sure all of you do as good educators, and we want to celebrate those successes. But it's a formal report that gets sent to the supervisor and the instructor, letting them know the summary and the supporting documentation of what was found. Our principals can request anything at any time if they feel that there's a concern, a performance concern with a teacher. They can ask for any one of these, or even for what we like to call a deeper dive, where we will go in and target a specific behavior that we might be worried about. And then, of course, we have executive leadership requests. We can look at the footprint of the teacher, how long they've been in the course, and all those sorts of things. Summative assessment is also used in addition to the formative assessment. So I think that Amy and I have tried to do a good job of explaining how we start with the student, and then all the way through the experience we look at lots of different data points covering all sorts of behaviors, instructional practices, and curriculum, the good things that we want to see happening. We also do have some summative assessments which we report out on. Every one of our courses has a segment exam at the end of the segment, and students are required to pass that in order to get credit for the course. In addition, in the last year and a half, we have begun on our part-time side having students sit for end-of-course assessments, which is our state sort of standards test for algebra, geometry, biology, and then this year we have done U.S. history. Briefly going to go over some of our initial results in a moment. However, our students have traditionally matched or surpassed state EOC. And then, of course, we also have our AP results, and we traditionally match or surpass those state and national AP results as well. We kind of tie these results to the fact of all the work that goes in on the beginning. So we believe that our ongoing assessment and our data-driven decisions and quality assurance data are instrumental in these positive student outcomes. Yes, oh, you already answered her. Okay, thanks. I'm trying to do too many things at one time. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about how we inspect what we expect using our balanced scorecard. Our balanced scorecard represents our student and our school improvement plan, rather. The BSC, as we lovingly call it, is designed to highlight areas of improvement and growth potential for our organization. We started with an organizational card that cascades into the various departments, so the metrics roll up from the departments. Metrics are measured monthly, quarterly, and semi-annually, depending on the nature of the metric. For example, we measure AP results annually. We will measure the EOC results quarterly in some EOCs because those have become more frequent, semi-annually in some because they only offer them 2 times a year. So it really depends on what the metric is as to how often we'll measure it. But when we do measure it, we do meet quarterly and evaluate the card. And if the metric is in the red, which means that we haven't met our target that we set, the teams responsible for that metric come to the table with possible reasons why it might be red, and more importantly, action plans that will be implemented in the next measuring cycle to improve the metric. And then we will come back and revisit that at the next meeting to see if the action plan actually worked. This ongoing overarching assessment of what we expect directly impacts student success and student learning. We wanted to take a brief moment just to have you look at some of our recent results on EOCs and the AP exams. Our instructional leaders visit segment exam averages with our instructors each month on walkthroughs. We have a report that gives the teachers their segment exam averages because it is used as a part of their evaluation, our student achievement data. That's what we use for our student achievement data. These numbers on the algebra EOC, geometry EOC, and the biology EOC show how our students stack up against the state and the nation for the AP scores. Let me grab those. These are 2012 AP results. You'll notice that we don't put up the 2013 yet because we haven't disaggregated that data. We get it a little bit later than most districts because we are not the school of record. We aren't able to do what most districts can do and just go in and pull a kid's data. We have to request it and pay for it and then disaggregate it. It doesn't come in a really pretty package for us. But once we do get all that done, we typically show in most of our courses, not in all of them you can see, but in most of them we outperform on the state and national mean. So Joe did a great job of talking about their reporting out. We have several annual reports that go both externally and internally depending on the report they are. We work with a company called AIR who takes all of our survey data and creates one big report that we use. We do take it up to the legislature, as Joe was mentioning as well. We report them out to our board. We also have just our FLVS annual report, which has much of the data that we've showed you here in terms of the EOC scores and the AP scores. So we report out on our surveys, we report out on our scores. We actually have a community relations department that handles most of that reporting out, that sort of navigates and makes sure that I'm trying to look at this question, make sure that it gets to the right people forward facing on our website and what. Hey Mike, so I assume that they would, but let Amy and I take that question and get with Larry and we will get back with you. Amy, will you get his name? But it was my understanding that they will be released to you all. Thank you, Dee. So we've had, Amy and I are done with our formal portion of this. We believe that evaluating effectiveness in the supplementary, or for any matter, for that matter, any online program must take many forms. We hope we've shown that we come at it from lots of different directions. We begin with the student, individualizing their instruction and their pace. Between our live lessons, discussion-based assessments, pre- and post-tests, we ensure that we are eliciting mastery out of our students. And as an instructional leadership team, we're really proud of the way they consistently inspect and expect with curriculum and instructional data. It helps us make decisions along the way instead of waiting until the result has occurred. We talk about lagging and leading data, so we really try to have as little lagging data as we can. We want to be able to use what information we have to make a change before the result is too late. Finally, our quality assurance team really pushes the thought in this direction and is constantly coming up with new ways to look and ensure that we are
to go ahead and tie
acting
in
with
the school
accountability and
improvement plan,
fidelity.
we often use that phrase, but for us at Florida Virtual, it's really close to the balanced scorecard that Robin had earlier discussed. And I just wanted to take a second to point out that all of our overarching target goals for our organization are really rooted in the same priorities, from card to card all over the organization, from teacher to executive. We're really held accountable to the bullets that you're looking at right now. So a student really does drive our organization, and we're constantly assessing every stage of progress, both the qualitative side and the quantitative side, to see what our students are feeling and if they're enjoying it, as well as mastering concepts. And so it really has been a commitment that Florida Virtual School has been able to just keep as a staple for our 15 years. But as Robin said, now we're actually able to capture several pieces of that summative data in order to see that our assessments are working. I see some really great questions in the chat box, but we've really appreciated your time today, and you're welcome to continue the questions or take over the mic if you have anything that we could to answer for you. But it really has been an honor to share with you what Florida Virtual School is passionate about.
Rob, this is Joe. If I could jump back in again, I think an important takeaway from here as you look about this kind of end goals, INACOL produced the quality metrics document and was released 2 VSSs ago, or 1 VSS and 1 eyeballs ago, however you track that acronym, is that report recommended that the use of end-of-course common assessments were in place and used, and that's a good contrast between Michigan and Florida. So Florida already has those, and I think in the subject areas you mentioned. There is no similar one in Michigan policy. I know at one point the state invested quite a lot of money in trying to come up with developing it. Was those assessments were developed inside the Michigan Department of Ed, but we're also an extremely strong local control state. So the assessments were created and shared publicly. You know, like districts could go and download them, but it sounds like talking to MDE folks that they've never ever received any data back that anyone's used them, and so that is going to be a challenge as we look to try to move the field forward, because I think that model of being able to have some external validation in the AP that's there with the test, but in the rest of them having kind of a common assessment is a challenge to do. Even one of the projects I'm working on right now is to try to work with the Michigan Department of Ed and do effectiveness reports for all of the online learning options that were listed in the teacher-student data link system, so our longitudinal system, and try to match that up with assessment data such as their performance on ACT. And those kinds of things I think are getting increased interest, but the data and some of those other policy limitations make it rather problematic at this stage.
Other comments or thoughts, Amy or Robin, based on what Joe said, or Joe, any other comments based on anything else that's been shared?
Hey, Joe, I just see a couple of questions that I think we wanted to try to answer real quick. There was one about us being aligned to Common Core. We're aligned to rigorous standards, but not all of our courses are quote-unquote Common Core courses. And then I see, do you think the state? I don't know, Mike. It would be a beautiful thing, wouldn't it?
On the Common Core part, I mean, just thinking how funny some of the politics can be. In our last State School Aid Act that went through, there was language that rescinded the use of any public dollars towards Common Core. And so when that went into effect, the Michigan Department of Education's website had so many references of Common Core that they couldn't figure out how to get rid of them, so they shut the entire website down for several days until the legislature said, well, that would be okay. So it can vary by one state to another state if even that's a good idea right now.
So somebody asked a question about the 28-day grace period versus 14-day grace period. I'm assuming Elena asked that question that you're asking about the dropout time, and I can't remember Michigan's. What I think I heard you say that's like a month or so, but Florida Virtual School was a month, but now it's 14 days. Do you guys want to comment a little bit about that? And Elena, if I didn't get that right, please type it in again.
Sure, I can start from Michigan's perspective. So the short of it is, if you enroll in March for a course that starts in fall, that window is relative to basically the course start date. So we say you can drop all the way up until the last day that you would make an enrollment. And then there's what we call a grace period, that if you enrolled on the very last day, you're covered by about 5 days going into the course, 5 course days or something like that. So we guarantee you a week of access. It could be as much as 9 months that you could change your mind without any kind of penalty, because several of those months the course wouldn't have started. In anything that was more, in the past, we don't offer these now, but in things that were more self-paced kinds of programs, we did it on 10 days from the start of the, when you got started in the course. But now we pretty much just have a set calendar that says enrollment starts on date, like say January 1st. It closes off in September 20th, and the drop date is September 20th. So if you've dropped before that, you wouldn't be charged or anything like that for the course.
Hey, Elaine, it's Robin. I thought I answered the question typing, but maybe not everyone saw it. We are also 14 days. We did drop from 28 days to 14 days. There was a lot of thought behind that, a lot of discussion with the districts, and much like what Joe was saying, it turned out that 28 days usually equated to about 40 days by the time they actually got activated and whatnot. So we feel good about this window. The data has shown us that it's about the right time to make sure that kids get engaged and that we are able to keep them.
Great. I don't think I've seen any other questions, so let me just open up the floor. Any other burning questions that people have? Feel free to grab the mic or type them into the chat room. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to put a link in the chat room for you to help evaluate this webinar of its usefulness so we can continue to improve our webinars in INACOL. But feel free to type other questions in there, or Robin or Amy or Joe, if there are other comments you want to share. In fact, let's just wait and see if there's other questions, and then I'll give you guys the last word in just a sec. All right, since I don't see any other questions, so let me turn this back over to Robin, Amy, and Joe. So let's start with Robin, then Amy, and Joe, you'll get the last word. So why don't you answer this question. As you look into the landscape of evaluation in online programs, are there other areas that are not being evaluated at this point that you're working on evaluating down the road, or are you guys pretty much got everything covered at this point and you're just working on being consistent in those areas? So I'll open that up, and Robin, then Amy, then Joe, or any variation of an answer to that question, that will be great to close out our webinar.
I think that the more quality assurance, that we're touching the tip of the iceberg with the quality assurance of our courses and our instructors and their practices. As I look down the landscape, I really see online learning organizations need to make sure that that piece really exists and that we are, in fact, inspecting.
And I'd have to agree there with Robin. I think we have a really comprehensive look on all ends for fidelity and just what we were going to look at as we continue forward is, are they working? And I think we have all the systems in place. It's just editing as we go to make sure that we are looking at every piece that needs to be looked at to make sure the student outcomes are the highest we can achieve.
And this is Joe. I'll take a slightly different angle at that. If you looked at the Keeping Pace report that was produced this year, you'll see that this course choice movement that's occurring across the country is certainly hit in Michigan and other states. I think this is bringing a different kind of effectiveness measures into the conversation. So it's not really where the conversation is going to shift, I think, in the next, in my case, in the next weeks. In other cases, it could be months or years, to thinking about program effectiveness against other programs and less about internal measures. So right now, one of the things that's really a hot topic in the state of Michigan is that students can take an online course from any provider in the state, provided that it's posted in a public catalog. And the school district has to accept that enrollment unless they can block it on rigor or quality or a few other measures. And when this happens, per federal guidelines, you can't, while you can unbundle the course, you can't unbundle the student accountability. So let's say that a local school district in Michigan wanted to use a Michigan virtual school course or a Florida virtual course. That school district would be on the hook to both provide the kid access to the online course, but also that district is responsible for the results of the AYP, for the adequate yearly progress for that student. And that is raising the stakes quite considerably for schools, wanting to see evidence that these schools and these providers are ensuring that there's high quality measures in place, that the kids are learning what they need to learn, and that's not, and they recognize that that's just not the same as the kid receiving a good grade in the course. And I think that tension is going to continue to ramp up in the next handful of months and years. And so that these measures like Florida, which has in place that external measure of the end of course assessment, or other states on their things like their ACT or whatever else they're using that can allow comparisons across, will become more and more important as we move forward in that kind of policy environment.
Awesome. On that note, please join me in a smiley face or applause, thanking Robin, Amy, and Joe for their, first of all, the preparation that it took to put all this stuff together, and then all of the great data and information you shared with all of us. So I look forward to seeing all of you hopefully on our webinar next week if you're interested in that. And if not, we, from iNACOL, certainly wish all of you a great holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year. So thanks, everybody. And if I could ask everybody to log out as soon as I stop the recording, then it allows the recording to be recorded faster, and then I can send that out to you more quickly. So thanks again.